From J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter books to Roald Dahl's tales, kids have long been kept entertained by these classics. But today, these books are struggling to capture children's imaginations in the same way. Reading for pleasure amongst under 18s has hit a crisis point, with the number enjoying it in their free time dropping to just 1 in 3. So what is behind this, and what are the long-term impacts? I'm Lucrezia Millarini, and this is what you need to know. Hello and welcome to today's episode of What You Need to Know, and I'm joined by our social affairs correspondent, Sarah Corker. Sarah, welcome. Listen, phones, tablets, social media, these new figures are not that surprising, but nevertheless quite depressing, aren't they? What do they tell us?
Yeah, that's right. Well, the National Literacy Trust carry out this survey every year. They ask about 70,000 8 to 18-year-olds about their reading habits. They've been doing this for 20 years. They ask them things like, how much you read for fun, what some of the distractions are. And the results are fascinating, but as you say, pretty depressing as well. So I'll just talk you through them. It found only a third of children enjoyed reading for fun in their free time. And that is the lowest level since they started doing this survey 20 years ago. And it's a sharp decline on last year. There's a gender gap too, so boys are less likely to read for fun in their free time, 28% of them, compared to girls, which is about 40%. And disadvantaged children are less likely to be engaged in reading and to read for fun. So some quite worrying statistics there. And the authors of this report have said that there are high numbers of children that are leaving primary school and secondary school without the reading skills that they need to thrive in life. And that is a big cause for concern. Some of them have said, it's hit crisis levels and we need to intervene to reverse this trend.
Sarah, can we look at that gender gap first of all? Why are fewer boys reading, do we think?
Well, that's a tough one to answer, and I don't think there's one answer to it. It's quite complicated. I think some of it is to do with outdated stereotypes. So girls read, boys play football. That's something that one head teacher said to me kind of persists in the fact that boys aren't as likely to be bought a book as a Christmas or a birthday present, for example. But I think it's about making sure that there are the right books, because not one size fits all. Not everyone likes the same thing. And I spoke to a group of Year 6 students in Leeds, and I asked them, what's your favourite book? What's your favourite author? And they came back with completely different answers, which I think was quite refreshing. The traditional classics like, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Matilda, Lion and the Witch and the Wardrobe, they've stood the test of time. They're still really popular. I saw them in the library at the school there. Harry Potter remains really, really popular. And remember back in the 90s, Pottermania, people queuing for hours overnight to get their hands on, some of the first copies. And that book was certainly credited, or the series of books were credited, for encouraging more boys to read more frequently. So I think it's about capturing the imagination and helping children to find books that they relate to, because we don't like the same thing, and, not everyone is going to relate to the same book.
Yeah, of course. And this data relates to under 18s, doesn't it? But are we seeing it first start happening with primary school children, and then it's going on to secondary school, making a big difference there?
Well, the report found that there was actually a particular crisis amongst secondary school pupils. That is the language they use, crisis. So, they're really, really worried about this. And I think the fall in leisure reading becomes more pronounced from 11 onwards. Now, that could be because, there's greater workload once you get to secondary school. There's increased use of technology and social media, so that potentially squeezes out the time that there is for reading. And perhaps there's just less mental space, I suppose, at the end of the day, to want to pick up a book for fun. But I think whatever age group we're looking at, it is a worrying trend.
Yeah, I mean, a worrying trend, as you say. But what do we think is behind it? You mentioned there, just the way we process information and the way we have so many different platforms now. What are teachers telling you? What has changed significantly now?
It's complex, and they're saying it's not one thing. There are lots of factors at play here, including, the ubiquity of smartphones and screens, that it is playing a large part in this. And figures tell us that most students have mobile phones by the time that they're 11, so there are more distractions. But there are also some bigger questions about the way that reading is taught in schools. Have we lost the fun in reading in the classroom? Is there too much focus on the mechanics and the skill of reading instead of the love of storytelling? Education unions have actually said that there is too much testing, particularly in primary schools, and a packed curriculum, academic expectations, more assessments, actually squeezes out the time that there is available for kids to read. And too many children think reading is about testing and passing exams. And I think that's quite sad, actually. Of course, that's important, doing well academically, but I think it's a real mix. And I met Emily Kane, and she's the head teacher at Armley Park Primary School in Leeds. I asked her what she thought was driving this trend.
I think there's just so many other distractions in the world these days compared to, say, when I was growing up, it was books or TV, and they were your two main things, really. Whereas now it's, you've got social media, you've got gaming, you've got the internet, for everything that they ever want. And your books are just not as accessible. You have to have a physical book to read it, whereas you can go on the internet and do whatever you want. And I think that's sometimes a barrier, that there just aren't enough books in people's houses.
And Sarah, it does sound like an obvious question, but why is it so important that children actually do read for fun?
Well, as you say, it sounds obvious, but it is a skill for life. The more books you read, the better your vocabulary. It opens up your imagination, broadens your horizons and your understanding of the world. And there are plenty of studies that show the clear link between reading and achievement levels, wealth and health. So some massive life-changing benefits. And I had a chat to some 10 and 11-year-olds in Leeds, and I asked them, about the joys and also the challenges of reading.
And what do you like about reading the most?
That you find out new words and find out what things mean in the books.
What do you sometimes find challenging about reading?
Usually if you don't know how to pronounce a word right, or if a word confuses you.
I think children should really read at home because it's good for the knowledge and they can get lost in their imagination.
I like to find out about what's happening in the plot and try and see if there's any big plot twists.
It helps me calm down when I'm stressed.
Well, they're the views of some children there. But do you think it's a wider issue? Do you think that all of us are kind of reading less because of some of the factors that we discussed earlier?
That is a really interesting question, and one I've been reflecting on this week when I was putting together this report. The fact that we all live really busy lives, we're often attached to our smartphones, scrolling through emails or social media, and sometimes you just feel exhausted at the end of the day, that you just don't have the energy perhaps to pick up a book. And when you're at a train station, you look around and most people are scrolling on their phones. It's rare now to see someone with their nose in a book. But then I think technology has also evolved the way that we interact with literature, certainly, whether it's audio books or a Kindle. And I think focus going forward should be, how do you work with technology to aid reading rather than against it?
Well, that's the next question, isn't it? Because as you say, smartphones, everything, it is a part of life now. There's no going back on that. But how do you reverse this really significant trend, and how do you get more kids, especially reading, and as you say, reading for fun?
Well, there are a couple of things. Rediscovering the joy of reading, putting the fun back into it, certainly in the classroom. And in schools, people who perhaps find reading difficult and a bit of a struggle, there is one-to-one support there available to really, help them develop that skill. But one of the issues I hear often from head teachers is that budgets are under pressure. And the school that I went to in Leeds, 4 years ago, they didn't have a library. They only have one today because they won a competition run by the Literacy Trust, and as part of a link up with the Premier League footballer Marcus Rashford. Now, they won the library, they got 800 books, they got the infrastructure, they got the furniture, and that has made such a huge difference to the students there, and the head teacher said so many more kids that are wanting to get reading, and the positive role models are really important as well. Representation as well, and having books that you can relate to. And that's something I spoke to Jonathan Douglas, the Chief Executive of the National Literacy Trust, about. Have a listen.
Children need to find themselves represented in the texts which they read, and that means regardless of their ethnicity, their social background, their gender, they need to find children like themselves in those books.
Well, the Trust, interestingly, is also working with TikTok in their latest campaign, and they're working alongside social influencers as a way to encourage people to read in a more traditional way. And the focus really is about changing the culture around reading. So quite an interesting link up there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the genie's out the bottle, isn't it? You've got to work with these new platforms now, haven't you? Listen, you also spoke to a children's author, Cressida Cowell, as part of your investigation. What did she make of all of this?
Yes, she's the author of How to Train Your Dragon. She said she writes books aimed particularly at boy readers. And she was really shocked by these figures, actually. She said urgent change is needed. She used some really strong language. She described it as an invisible disadvantage. She said it's a social mobility time bomb. And again, we came back to that conversation about there's lots of focus in school on the mechanics of reading, but not the love of reading. And her belief is that actually government need to lead on this. They need to put an action plan in place to try and reverse this trend. But, where do you start with that? Her answer is you need to make sure that there are libraries in every single primary school.
And it is astonishing, isn't it, that in 2024 there are primary schools, there are schools, you mentioned the one earlier, that don't actually have a library. It takes a footballer's intervention in that case to get a library into schools. I mean, this is a big problem, isn't it?
Yeah, and I've got some more staggering figures for you. 1 in 4 schools in disadvantaged areas don't have a library. That's around 750,000 children missing out. And libraries in prisons are statutory. Libraries in primary schools aren't. And Cressida, who I spoke to, she said, look, that needs to change urgently if we're going to reverse this trend. Affordability is also a problem too. We know that parents have been hit hard by the cost of living crisis. Nearly 10% of children don't have a book in their own home. There've also been cuts to local libraries in certain parts of the country, and the pandemic has really increased some of these challenges. So authors particularly are saying, look, we need to make it much easier for parents, kids and schools to get their hands on the books they need, and that starts with having the infrastructure available in schools so that love of reading is developed from an early age. Okay, well listen, Sarah, it's fascinating to talk about all this, and as you say, not particularly surprising, but still pretty depressing. Thank you so much for talking to us, and thank you everyone for watching and for listening. For more on this, please head over to our website or ITVX and do have a look back through our other quick briefings on a range of headline topics to find out what you need to know. Until the next time, thank you.